Hello, my name is C. Riley Snorton, and I am the Interim Faculty Director of the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, and a professor of English and Gender and Sexuality Studies at the University of Chicago. Chicago is the tribal homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, as well as other tribes. Due to Chicago's location at the intersection of several great waterways, the land became a site which many tribes used for traveling and healing. Indigenous people continue to call this area home as the sixth largest urban Native community practices their heritage, traditions, and care for the land and waterways. Today, it is my privilege to introduce this year's annual public lecture, established in 2013 to bring distinguished public intellectuals whose work promotes engaged thought and scholarship around the topics of race and ethnicity within the public sphere. In previous years, we've been fortunate to hear from luminaries such as Dr. Angela White Davis, Danny Glover, Dr. Cornel West, Kathleen Cleaver, Vijay Prashad, and Jose Antonio Vargas. This afternoon, we have gathered for the occasion to witness a performance of Felon, a play, a discourse by poet and legal scholar Reginald Dwayne Betts, followed by a conversation with writer and assistant professor in the University of Chicago's Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy, and Practice, Dr. Eve L. Ewing. This year's annual public lecture is also the closing plenary for Racial Reckonings and the Future of the Humanities, the inaugural conference of the Centering Race Consortium, a Mellon-supported collaborative initiative between Brown, Stanford, Yale, and the University of Chicago. And this event is also co-sponsored by the Posen Family Center Human Rights Lab and the Mass Incarceration Working Group at UChicago. Before introducing our speakers, I want to offer my thanks to the many people who have made this possible, including Tracy Matthews, Alice Kim, Marilyn Wright, Michael Fisher, Jacqueline Gaines, Tierra Kilpatrick, as well as my colleagues at the Centering Race Consortium, Tricia Rose and the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America, Jennifer Brody and the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity, and Stephen Pitty and the Center for the Study of Race, Indigeneity, and Transnational Migration. Many thanks also to our ASL interpreters for today's event, Barbara Williams-Finley and Shantae Frazier. I'm also so grateful to my colleague and CSRPC faculty affiliate Eve Ewing, who will be in conversation with our guest this afternoon. Dr. Eve L. Ewing is a sociologist of education and a writer from Chicago. She's the award-winning author of the poetry collections Electric Arches and 1919, and the nonfiction work Ghosts in the Schoolyard, Racism and School Closings on Chicago's South Side. She's a co-author with Nate Marshall of the play No Blue Memories, The Life of Gwendolyn Brooks. She also currently writes the Champion series for Marvel Comics and previously wrote the acclaimed Ironheart series, as well as other projects. Her work has been published in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The New York Times, and many other venues. And her first book for young readers, Maya and the Robot, is forthcoming in just a few months in July 2021. And now to introduce our speaker for the 2021 annual public lecture. Reginald Dwayne Betts transformed himself from a 16-year-old kid sentenced to 9 years in prison to a critically acclaimed writer and graduate of the Yale Law School. He has written 3 acclaimed collections of poetry, the recently published Felons, Bastards of the Reagan Era, and Shahid Reads His Own Poem. His memoir, A Question of Freedom, a memoir of learning, survival, and coming of age in prison, chronicles Betts' years in prison, reflecting back on the event that precipitated his incarceration and looking ahead to how his experiences and the books he discovered while incarcerated would define him. In A Question of Freedom, Betts confronts profound questions about violence, freedom, crime, race, and the justice system, and narrates his discovery of the power of language through books, poetry, and his own pen. Confined by cinder block walls and barbed wire in one of the worst prisons in the state of Virginia, where solitary confinement horrific conditions and constant violence threatened to break his humanity, Betts used the time to turn himself into a poet, a scholar, and an advocate for change in the criminal justice system. Betts is also the creator and project director of the Million Book Project, a new initiative funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to distribute a curated 500-book collection to 1,000 medium and maximum security prisons, including at least one juvenile detention center across every state in the United States over the next 3.5 years. We could not be more honored to have Reginald Dwayne Betts as this year's CSRPC annual public lecturer and to witness a performance of Felon, a play, a discourse, as a conclusion to the Centering Race Consortium Conference. To underscore one of our key terms over the course of the last couple of days in racial reckonings and the future of the humanities, to reckon is to stage a confrontation, to catalyze a response, to create the conditions for accountability. All of this in the service of transformation. To draw a verse from Betts's poem, House of Unending, published in Poetry Magazine in 2019, there is no name for this thing that you've become, convict, hostage, inmate, lifer, yardbird, all fail. If you can't be free, be a mystery, an amnesiac, anything, but avoid succumbing to the humdrum, swallowing a bullet, or even just choosing to inhale. I hope you will please join me in enthusiastically welcoming Reginald Dwayne Betts.
Oh, that was a fantastic introduction, and I'm sort of delighted to be here, and delighted to be able to talk to Eve in a bit. That's one of my favorite lines from my poem, and just so everybody know, the illusion, if you can't be free, be a mystery, is from Canary, a poem by Rita Dove. So I'm just going to get into it since I don't have too much time. This is a 3-act solo show, runs about 77 minutes. I'm doing the first 2 acts. It's still a work in progress, so don't tell people when you see it unless you like it. If you don't like it, you can tell them you ain't like it, but don't tell me you told them that. All right, the next time I start talking, I will have begun. What do you think about when you hear the word prison? Some folks, they say violence. They say the prison cells. If they got a loved one who's been inside, they might say how long it takes to get from home to hug the person you know. Me? When I think about the word prison, when I hear it, I think about the word book. I think about books. You see, in prison, there was no way to reach out and grab something off a shelf like this. And to fully understand where I'm coming from, I gotta take you back to the summer of 1998, when my world was like this. See, I was in solitary confinement. I was 17 years old and I should have been celebrating my high school graduation. I should have been thinking about the prom, thinking about college, packing, but nah. I was in a cell in a hole, trying to learn how to do time by listening to the men who shouted from 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. I would listen to them, and I remember one night I heard a man yell, "Hey, yo, send me a book." Somebody responded by sliding a book from one cell to another. I was in one of those old school prisons where the cells were parallel, going down a corridor that seemed to last as long as the Atlantic. And when the book slid from one cell to the other, you could hear it swish, swish. I figured these cats knew each other. Didn't think much of it. Day or so later, I hear somebody else, "Yo, send me a book." Then I heard, "What cell?" 13. Swish. If it was a magazine, it sounded like birds' wings flapping. Back in the whole books were contraband. And I realized these dudes had set up an underground library. The only rule was that if somebody asked for a book, you gave it to them if you had it. I was kind of shook though, because I was following the penitentiary rules that say you don't ask nobody for nothing. I was 16 years old, remembering how I just faced life in prison, how I've been sentenced to damn near a decade, and I ain't want to break the first rule I've been taught. But nights get long in a hole, and so I said, fuck it. Hey, yo, send me a book. Somebody calls back. What cell you in, young blood? 21. I get on the door because I want to see who's sending me the book, right? But the cat is to the left of me, and the cell is so far away that when he's standing up, I can't see his face. Then he lays down on the ground and presses his ear to the concrete as if he's listening for something. I can see his arm slide out the cell, swish, 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 and he launches the book, swish, and it lands in my hand. Dudley Randall's The Black Poets. I told you I was 16, 17 years old, and I had it. The first thing that came to my mind is, who thinks I want to read poetry? Teenager. And all I know about poems is roses are red and violets are blue. But that's all I had. So I started reading it. Sterling Brown, Amiri Baraka, Lucy Terry. I mean, it's crazy. Tolson, County Cullen. I'm reading about poets I never heard before, and now they talking to me, right? Now I'm hip. June Jordan, Sonia Sanchez, Lucille Clifton. And it got to the point that, like, I would just flip through pages and stop on names randomly. Names because they called out to me. I stopped on this cat named Etheridge. Because I didn't know anybody's mama then or now who named him Etheridge. And I wanted to see what he was talking about. And I'm reading his poems, and he's talking about 46 black faces taped to his cell wall. I had 7 faces taped to my wall. He's writing poems for 16-year-olds in prison. A cat named Freckle-Faced Gerald. I came into prison when I was 16, and when Knight said 16 years hadn't done a good job on his voice, I read it with my voice still cracking. I had to write the poems down longhand because I knew that I'd be sent to another prison. I knew somebody would call out for a book and I had to send this one flying. And it was wild because a month or so later, I learned that Knight had been in prison. No wonder when I read his words, I could hear him singing underneath them. Name a song that tells a man what to expect after prison. Explains Occam's razor. You're still a suspect after prison. And it's crazy because 2 decades later, I had written my own thing and named it Felon because I wanted folks to pick it up and know exactly where I'd been, right? And if you read through it and you get to the acknowledgments, you'll see that I dedicated this book to my homies, you know, friends of mine with names like Roger Fentress and Christopher Tunstall. Men I did bids with, men that also came to prison as teenagers. And it's fucked up because the book is hardback. I published this thing and unwittingly got it in a form that couldn't get into prisons. I told myself, I'm gonna make me a prison edition. I'm talking to friends, right? I'm like, yo, I'm gonna make me a prison edition, get this book, make sure it gets into prisons. And one of my friends was like, you gonna make you a prison edition? And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna make me a prison edition. You know what I mean? They don't need to do shit like this. I'm gonna get 20,000 copies. And he said, a prison edition? I thought you was about freedom. And I was like, nah, what I said was, I'm gonna make me a freedom edition. I'm gonna make it, I'm gonna print out 20,000 copies, and we're gonna give them away to people in prison all over the country. And I did, right? Made a freedom edition. And it's crazy because if you listen to the pages, they damn sounded like wings flapping. Send them to prisons hoping that dudes get it. Men, women, just people, get the joint. Read it, and underneath my words, hear me singing. Name a song that tells a man what to expect after prison. Is this Occam's razor? Am I still a felon after prison? Blood history. The things that abandon you get remembered different. The things that abandon you get remembered different. The things that abandon you get remembered. I was in a cell at Sussex One State Prison with my man Juvie. Juvie was on the bottom bunk, and we was at one of these penitentiaries that ain't have hot water or microwave. So if you wanted to cook something or make a cup of coffee, you had to do what we call hooking yourself up with a stove. You take a roll of toilet paper and you spin it around your hand like this, right? And then once it got the right size, you roll the bottom out. And when you could see through it, you had a winner, and you would sit it on that tin toilet of yours, right? And you set the bottom on fire and the flame would shoot through the center and it'd be all flame and no smoke. And you would hold you a soda can filled with water attached to a string over the flame. And once it was finished, once the flame had burned out, you had you some boiling water and you could handle your business. So Juvie's on the bottom bunk and he's looking at me perplexed because I done hooked up a stove, but I ain't got no soda can. I'm holding a sheaf for letters, 5 years worth from my pops. Juvie watches me hold my father's letters over the flame and wait as they turn to ash. The things that abandon you get remembered different. As precise as the English language can be, with words like penultimate and perseverate, there is not an exact combination of sounds that describe only that leaving. Once, drinking and smoking with buddies, a friend asked if I longed for a father. Had he said wanted, I would have dismissed him in a way that youngins dismiss it all. A shrug, sarcasm, a sharp jab to the stomach, laughter. But he said longing. And in a different place, I might have wept. Said, once, my father lived with us and then he didn't, and it fucked me up so bad I didn't think about us leaving until I held my firstborn in my arms and only now speak on it. A man who drank whiskey and wild Irish rose like water once told me and some friends that there is no word for father where he comes from. Not like we know it. There, the word father is the same as the word for listen. The blunts we passed around let us abandon our tongues. Not that much though. But what if the old head knew something? And if you have no father, you can't see straight. Years later, my pop says to me, boy, why your firstborn ain't got our name? As if he ain't know. Some things turn your life into a prayer. The gods will certainly answer. I hadn't heard my father's voice in a decade. And I hadn't read his words in 5 years since I burned his letters. And that morning he woke up and he took 2 buses, a train, another bus, and then walked for 20 minutes to get to this law firm. And he walks into the attorney's office and he greets the administrative assistant, right? And he says, my name is Reginald Dwayne Betts, and I'm here to see attorney blah, blah, blah. And there was a young woman working there. And when he said his name, she paused. He thought she wasn't listening. So he said, my name is Reginald Dwayne Betts, and I'm here to see attorney. She looks at him. I think I'm dating your son. You see, I came home and I was working in this bookstore, right? And this woman comes in early one morning to buy a textbook for her African American Studies class. And I get to talking to her, And then I get to like reading her poems and shit, you know what I mean? And months later, we was dating and we was kicking it. And she was working in this law firm, this attorney's office. And my pops say, nah. My son went to prison when he was 16 and he's still there, and I haven't heard from him in years. We was at that stage of love where when you get that phone call and you see the name, you just light up. So I get the phone call and I see the name and I light up. And I answer, and all I hear is, son. You see, no letters distinguish my father's name from my own. No signal for the mailman, the postman, my employer. The man before them is me and not what follows after grief. We are no goldfinch. Instead, a kind of crow, a murder of us looming. Search our history and find felonies and divorce proceedings, the online account of our background, a song of tragedy and regret. A dozen men with portions of our name, variations and fragments, evidence of being called before a judge for everything from domestic violence to traffic tickets to something called jury trial prayer. And all I did to land me in those prison cells. And there is no way to distinguish us without a birth date, a social security number, or witnessing the tat along the inside of my right arm. Name a song that tells a man what to expect after prison. Is this Occam's razor? Am I still a felon after prison? I came home on March 4th, 2005. March 4th, walked into my mother's house for the first time since I was a teenager, and I'm surrounded by family. My uncle's there, I got cousins there, my grandmama, my mom's there, friends, and I'm telling them I came home on March 4th. I'm like, March 4th out into the world? And they're like, we know. I'm like, nah, March 4th. March 4th. And they looking at me. And my uncle, like I told you, that boy was going to lose it fucking with them poems. And I'm like, nah, March 4th is the only date that's both a date and a command. March 4th. I thought somebody was talking to me. March 4th out into the world. Leave all that prison shit behind. But my man Terrell Kelly had become star. My man Anthony Wynn had become absolute. I knew dudes who rechristened themselves righteous in mathematics and wisdom. And some of us just carried names that said who we were when we came in. So Roger Fentress became Fats because he still had the chubby cheeks of the 16-year-old that walked into prison for the first time. Christopher Tunstall became Juvie. He got locked up a few years before us when it was rare for them to throw teenagers into prison. And shit, I told dudes to call me Shaheed because it meant the witness in Arabic. What kind of fool am I? Choosing a name like that and imagining that I'd turn the first corner of freedom without remembering where I've been. Last 4 lines of a love song after prison. Prison killed you, my love. Killed you so dead that you're not here now. You're never here. You're always in those cells. Own you. Brown liquor owns you. And there is no room for me unless I call the police, the state, upon my pistol and set you free. My lover don't believe in my sadness. She says whiskey and not time is what left me wrecked after prison. And she might be right. My liver awash in all but dregs of a charred oak cask, soaked in barley's amber, shadowed as blood, dim as a sail in the hole. Survived. Brackish prison water only to become collateral. The things that haunt me still drown now, friends say, in nearly 50 pounds of brick-hued rock gut. Spiritus frumenta. A gallon of whiskey weighs 8 pounds, and I am riven. And all this becomes a man confessing. Dear warden, dear warden, my time been served. Let me go. You promised that some of this I wouldn't recollect after prison. It's kind of wild though, because for real, I hit the ground running. I'm talking about a couple years. I had an AA, a BA, a MFA. Shit, I was catching degrees like I was catching felonies, right? And I thought I was making it. And I remember I went into this one interview. I'm trying to teach poetry to kids. And so I go into the interview, I got my portfolio, I'm looking at the folks, I'm excited to be there, and I turn and I face her. Talking about my teaching aesthetics. And she's reading my poems, or she read my poems, and she's like, you're a good writer, kid. And in 5 minutes, she's calling me Dwayne, and she says that I would be a great addition to the team. She asked me about prison. Nah, that's a lie. She asked me about the gap on my resume, and I told her about prison. And she says, a lot of brothers went inside, and they not in this interview right now. So we're gonna take it from here. And like I said, you be a welcome addition to our team. It was like the first job that I gotten that like I really, really wanted, you know what I mean? Like the thing that said that I developed some skill that was marketable beyond like pushing buttons on the cash register or whatever. So I left excited. Then a few days later, she called me and she said, Mr. Betts. And when she called me Mr. Betts, I figured something wasn't right. And she said, our board of directors, you got to understand, I mean, your crimes were really violent. And you would be working with children. I mean, our funders, and the job sort of disappeared and I knew it. And I kind of stopped listening to her as she was talking. And instead I heard her, like not the words, but what they were explaining, which is to say she was telling me that from inside a cell, the night sky isn't the measure. That's why it's prison's vastness. Your eyes reflect after prison. I should have known. I mean, shit. Howard University had denied me a full tuition scholarship, some academic shit. I had an academic scholarship. And they was like, well, you got a lot of A's. I mean, you almost have a 4.0 GPA, but you also have 3 felonies. And so I wasn't sweating it though, because I got a scholarship at University of Maryland. I did my thing and I figured, I could outpace the record. But I apparently couldn't. And my back was against the wall. I owed people money. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Prince George's Community College, University of Maryland, Warren Wilson. All these folks wanted to be paid. I couldn't get a gig. So I did what anybody in my situation would do. I started selling dope. Nah, I ain't start selling dope. I went back to school. And it's crazy, right? Because I was asking myself, what degree can a cat with 3 felonies get that would make him employable? And you're right. I said I'm gonna go to law school. And so I go to law school and I go to a decent law school too. And it's wild because in my first day, I'm in this legal research and writing course. And I learned how to do legal research in prison with dudes trying to run down life sentences, right? And so I thought they can't fuck with me. I learned how to do research when I didn't know what Google was, let alone a laptop. And so I'm in this class and I kind of feeling myself. And then the professor says, law school is a place where poets go. And I know that he's talking to me. I mean, I gotta be the only poet in this law school, if not every law school in America. Because poets know better than to become lawyers. I was the only fool who didn't, you know what I mean? And so I'm in a joint thinking he's talking to me, and I started finishing his sentences for him. I was like, he's gonna say, law school is the place where poets go to become senators. Nah. Law school is the place where poets go to become Thurgood Marshall. Nah. This was 2013. Barack Obama was the president. And I thought he's about to say law school is the place where poets go to become president. And then he looks me in my face and he says, law school is the place where poets go to die. And it fucked me up. My whole 3 years of law school, I couldn't stop thinking about that shit. And I always was trying to find a way to like be a poet in that building. Then on the back end of my studies, this cat says, yo, you got to read this case. It's a class action lawsuit. He says, yo, they suing the city because they locking them up because they can't pay bail, because they can't pay traffic tickets. And I'm reading it and I'm into it. I'm like, oh shit, like this is why I came to law school. And I'm reading it and I'm reading it. And by the time I get to like page 25, page 30, I realize that it's so dense with legalese that as much as I thought it mattered, ain't no way my mama gonna get anything out of the pages. And I asked myself, I was like, yo, if I could turn that into a song, then I done accomplished something. And I went to work and came up with this. In the middle of Alabama, the people versus the city of Montgomery, the plaintiffs, impoverished, jailed by the city, unable to pay traffic tickets, pay or sit in jail. $50 per day, plaintiffs unable to pay, each sent to jail. Told they could work off debts, $25 per day, cleaning the city, scrubbing feces and blood from jail floors. The treatment reveals the city against its poorest, jailing people if they poor. Plaintiffs seek fundamental rights. They suffered the city's unlawful. It is the policy of the city to jail people. It is the policy of the city to jail people. It is the policy of the city to hold prisoners until extinguished. It is the policy. It is the policy. Plaintiffs seek relief. Name a song that tells a man what to expect after prison. Is this Occam's razor? Am I still a felon after prison? My father was born in 1960, 8 years before the king's assassination sparked the torching of his city. And 20 years later, just as crack would make my father's home burn again, I arrived like that man's shadow. The room fills with us when I enter. Our regrets, our anchor, our history, an echo that sounds when I speak. The 10 years I now own somehow more and more like the decades he has lost. Though, in a way, I know this is the kind of thing he call bullshit on. And point out that there is nothing in the cracks and tremors and bass lines of my voice that suggests the 6-story window he leapt from, as if to test the theory of man and flight and the tattooed wings that I obsess over. I once walked into this museum, right? And it was this one room, this giant room really, and there was a sculpture in it. It's crazy. It was a stack of books that was made out of wrought iron. They looked at like they were rusting. They looked at like they were ancient. And it was wings coming out the backs of the books, and the wings were so long, they were longer than Shaquille's arms. And I'm walking in and I'm looking at this. And the first thing I think is, how do I describe this to my pops? We had started talking to each other like sale partners, which is to say that all of our regrets had stripped shame away from us, and we was honest in a way we hadn't been before. And I wanted him to see this. I wanted him to see this thing that I was witnessing. Now I'd done 8 years in prison and didn't get a single tattoo. And I'd been home for another dozen years and still hadn't gotten a tattoo. And I saw this sculpture. I stood before it and I called my pops to try to explain to him what this said to me about freedom. I said, Dad, I'm gonna get it tatted on my back. And he's like, you did how many years and ain't get a tattoo? And you been home how long and you still ain't got a tattoo? You gonna get that on your back? Why? I tried to explain to him that I had done all that time and always imagined that the books would give me flight. It's hard to explain it to him. But when I was sitting in a chair and over 3 days, the artist carved these books into my spine, carved the wings into my arms, I understood something else about suffering, about time. I got him to turn one of the spines of the books out so that you could read the title of the book. And I had him write Therese, Mackay, and Miles. I remember coming home and my youngest boy say, Dad, why you get your name written? Why you get my name written on your back? And I was explaining to him that like they were the book that get me through these things. He didn't ask about what was on the pages that he couldn't see. But that he asked, I would have told him they were the names of friends, the stories we tell ourselves, hoping that there is some flight of freedom for them. Parking lot. A confession begins when I walk out of that parking lot. A confession begins when I walk into a parking lot. The man was waiting for home, asleep in a car after a working man's day. Everything I know of home is captured by the image of a man running from the police, his arms flailing unlike any bird you'd expect to fly. Walking into a parking lot begins a confession. The burner is a key, and afterwards there will be no home to find. My boots echoed against the black of asphalt. Hours before I flashed a pistol on that family, I kissed my mother goodnight. I told my girl I loved her. But when has love ever been enough? Ever since I've been home, I've been writing my man Juvie. And so like halfway through law school, he writes me. He's like, yo, you remember Fetz? I'm thinking, how couldn't I? I mean, me and homie came in together. You know, he was in a cell adjacent to me. And I remember him saying, Shaheed, man, you know I'm innocent. I was like, He's like, nah, man, ain't do this shit. I was like, all right. He's like, nah, look, man, the prosecutor offers me 20 years. Then they offer me 15. Then they offer me 9. And I said no to all of that shit, right? Then they offer me 5. And I say no again. Because why am I going to cop to killing a nigga that I ain't killed? And so Juvie like, you remember Fats? And I'm like, yeah. He like, well, you know, I told him you in law school. And, you know, dude saying he innocent. He trying to get free. So he probably gonna hit you up. And Fats, he hit me up. And In the letter, he's like, yo, man, I'm on a yard and dudes is talking shit, man. And dudes is telling war stories. And, we all got locked up as kids. So our war stories date back 20 years. And some cat talking about how he came through Midlothian Village one day and how he popped this dude in the ass, right? And he's telling a story about the dude jumping into the car and speeding off and he's laughing and shit. And I'm listening and I pull him to the side later. I'm like, man, dude died. And the cat like, how you know he died? And he's like, I got 53 years for that murder. Dude is fucked up. And I look in the letter because Fat say he wrote an affidavit, and I look in the letter and it was an affidavit, handwritten, confessing. And Fat is like, we done sent this joint to everybody, prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges. I mean, ain't nobody doing shit. And Juvie say you in law school, man, so you gotta do something to help get me out. Parking lot 2. A confession began when I walked out of that parking lot. A confession began when I walked black out of that parking lot. A confession began when I, without combing my hair, dressed for a day that would find me walking out of that parking lot black. There is so much to be said of a black boy with fat cheeks and unkempt hair. He meets the description of the suspect. Suspect is running. But what black boy ain't run away from things far less frightening than the police? Essay on reentry. Telling a story about innocence won't conjure acquittal. Story about innocence. I remember when I got locked up. That morning, me and my homie, we was running from the police and they got us, and it was like 25 of them. They all had their guns on us. Less than an hour later, I'm in a precinct in some interview room, cuffed to a desk. And truth is, within like 11 minutes, man, I confessed everything. The cop had convinced me that if I apologized, if I wrote a letter, I'd be home before dinner. And it was a Sunday, and I was trying to go home. So I said I did it. Telling a story about innocence won't conjure acquittal. And after interrogation and handcuffs and the promises of cops blessed with an arrest before the first church service ended, I become my father. The tape sparrowed my song back to me, but guilt lacks melody. Later, in a letter, my victim tells me I was robbed there. The food was great and drinks delicious, but I was robbed there. I would consider going back. He said it as if I didn't know. Why would he return to a memory like that? Why would he return to that memory? As if there is a kind of insight that rides shotgun with the awfulness of a pistol in a dark night. There's a Tupac song that begins with a life sentence. Imagine, I scribbled my name on a confession, as if autographing a book. Tell your mother that. Say the gun was a kiss against the sleeping man's forehead. Say that you might have been his lover and that on a different night, he might have moaned. For a bail denied, I won't tell you how it ended, and his mother won't either. But beside me, she stood in some things neither of us could know. And now, all is lost, lost is all in what came after. The kid, and we should call him kid, call him a child. His face smooth and without history of a razor. He shuffled ghostly in a court, and let's just call it a cauldron. and admit his nappy head made him blacker than whatever pistol they claimed he'd held, whatever solitary awaited. The prosecutor's bald head was black or brown, but when has brown not been akin to black hair, to abyss? And does it matter, black lives, when all the prosecutor said of black boys was that they killed? The child beside his mother and his mother beside me, and I am not his father. Just a public defender near starving here where the state turns men, women, children into numbers, seeking something more useful than another guilty plea. And his boy besides me withering on the brink of life and broken. And it's all possible because the judge spoke and the kid says, I did it. I mean, I didn't. I mean, Jesus. Someone wailed and the boy's mother yells, this ain't justice. You can't throw my son into that fucking ocean. She meant jail. And we was powerless to stop it. And too damn tired to be beautiful. Keith, Juvie, Star, Absolute, Fats, Luke, Chicago, Pops, Gray, Snake, Smoke, Slim, Malik, Blue, Black, Yusef, Bass, Black, Trigger, Vanessa, Papo, Snoopy, Bolivia, and Venezuela, and DC, and New York, and LA, and a dozen men named for cities or countries most of us would never see or see again. Cyrus, Mad Dog, Momo, Divine, Shorty, 40, Wise, Can't Get Right. Who would name a child Can't Get Right? The boy about 15 years old and I was 21 and he calling me a old head. And we all called him Can't Get Right. The COs, us. I bet his mama called him Can't Get Right. And all he did was like smile too much, laugh too loudly, and probably run with a few dudes that ain't have his best interest in heart. But he was there. He was there in the same hell as all of us. And his name, shit, maybe all of our names, became something of an elegy, the elegy of a cell door closing. And a judge would count the trees in the parking lot where there were only cars. 0, the same number of stars you could see on a night in the city. And a judge would let my man and them know that the parking lots would be crowded with oaks and spruces and pines and willows and grass and maybe horses before the smell of the city on a Sunday would reach any of them. Another word for this story is azalea, the purple bouquet our mamas might have buried their face against if they known for most judges a sentencing is a funeral. Another purplish bruise, a body lost to time, or somebody disappearing in the cells. A vehicle for more waste, and court becomes a wake. Fats once washed his hands against the air as if to say fuck everything. No hair troubled his face when he got laced with those 53 years that afternoon. And he never held a razor, not even inside his mouth. The best weapon a man could hope for unless you were the fool who tussled with a Louisville slugger. The razor under his tongue turning into a prayer. His hands leaping to his face and blood appearing as if always there. And a man's hands fumbling against the air as if ablution could be found in blood. And remembering reminds me that hands washing the air like that might be a kind of holy, a plea of reaching for cars, for trees, for wild horses, for all the violence a brother might know to make of himself free when innocence fails. Four years have passed. I got Fats a lawyer. 4 years had passed and he still wasn't free. And I had started representing juvie on parole. And we went to hearing after hearing. and he still wasn't free. Somebody had hooked it up for me to go talk to the chair of the parole board for them both. So I'm headed back to Virginia. I'm wondering what I say. I mean, these dudes have spent both each more than 2 decades in prison. Spent more time in prison than free. I had already failed, you know? And so I go into this office to talk to this woman, and I'm wondering, what do you say that amounts to freedom? And it hit me. Fats ain't never killed nobody, but it's no more years in cells than cities, than school, than lovers, than his favorite cousin lived. More years than freedom. We met before B ran his time up over a 5-inch black and white. Before K broke somebody's jaw with a lock in a sock. Back when everyone thought they'd go home. Before T went home and came back. Before J went home and was murdered. He gives me the math on men I did my bid with. Yesterday, I sat at a table with Star. Remember him? I was looking at his balding head, and he was looking at the grays that cover my crown. I looked at Juvie at a near table, both crown and beard stubble completely gray. We first discovered jail cells decades ago as teenagers. And just today, a mirror reminded me of my disappeared self. Androgenic alopecia, a word for our vanishing hair. Latin describing how time will cause everything to recede. No word exists for the years that we've lost to prison. And I thought Fats describing a moment he shared with men he's known for a score of years in cells was thinking about all that loss. But he writes, looking at the landscape of gray that had become them, he realized it was far from over. Because all these rounds later, prison ain't still undefeated. And one of these days, we might find us some free. Titus Gafar etched faces against these gray bars. He knows redaction is a dialect after prison. I had my homies send me their clothes. They sent me their sweatpants and t-shirts. I mean, these are clothes that they have worn, right? And at first had been what you use to look fly on the yard. And then it become what you slept in. And then it become what you worked out in. And the clothes said something about time that can't really say no other way. And I had the clothes and I wanted to turn it into paper. I wanted to make something that represented them outside of prison. I mean, Fats, Juvie, Luke, Star, Ab, all these dudes sent me their clothes. And I turned it into these sheets that we hung on walls. And I say, Ruth, paper maker, take these tattered gray sweats and make paper of our bids. A pass we won't reject after prison. At the time, all these cats had sentences approaching life. And it's crazy because they started coming home. Started coming home. You know, Fats, he got a pardon. Fats got a pardon. Juvie made parole. Luke made parole. Ad was waiting to see if he would make parole. Star was waiting. But look, me, Fats, Juvie, and Luke, we had all did time together. Same prison. Me and Juvie was in a cell together. Luke was in a cell above us. Fats was in a cell down the way. I mean, we kicked it for years, And they were home during the middle of a pandemic, so we could rap, but we couldn't see each other. And Juvie came home in May, and then he died in December. Survived 26 years in prison, only to die from some shit that the doctors couldn't name. And all I had was these letters that he written me, He used to write me on legal tablets, and I was working for this Japanese artist, and she was taking the prison paper and turning them into a song for freedom. She was cutting them into squares and floating 11th century Japanese records on them, floating mica into them. I sent her the letters, and she started cutting them up and floating the pages into it. And it's crazy. This is Juvie's handwriting from like a decade ago. 6900 Atmore Drive. It's the address of the parole board. This letter, the first time he asked me to help him get out. I said, Kyoko, take these handwritten letters, add them to the years eclipse, make prayers, 1,000 kites, beauty few expect after prison. Thank you.
Yo, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, that was just incredible. I am in my feelings. Other people might also be in their feelings, but I'm going to try to tie myself together and ask you some good questions. First of all, how are you? It's good to see your face.
I'm good. Yeah, no doubt. It's really great to be here with you and to be in this conversation. And yeah, I can't complain too much,
Whenever people say that, I'm always like, you could complain, because people who don't have anything to complain about tend to complain. So it's like you're choosing not to, and I appreciate that. I complain a lot. So I have some questions for you, and I'll try to not suck up all of our time so that we also can get to some of these audience questions. But I want to start by saying that, I saw an interview where you shared that every great thing that you have done has emerged from not quite knowing what you were going to do. And so therefore leaning into what you desired for this life. I'm paraphrasing you only slightly though, because you said it real dopely and poetically. And I constantly, you're an educator, I'm an educator. I constantly have students come into my office and ask this question about what should I do? How do I live my life? And I feel like that question is latent in a lot of your work. So I wondered if you could talk just about this idea of pursuing your desires and spending your time, and how does one pursue making the life that you want for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that like that Lucille Clifton poem that was like what motto did I have? Born we should say
Born both woman and black or non-black.
Yeah, and Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
What choice did I have to be but myself? I mean, I think the power in that though is admitting that sometimes what feels like the lack of choices gives you permission. So when I went to prison, I mean, I was so young, man. I was 16. And you can't really complain anymore once you go to prison. I mean, you know, it's ideas that exist in the world around abolition. It's ideas that exist in the world around how prisons are inherently unhealthy, unsafe, and like dignity stripping institutions. But cats inside, you know, it's like, but I pulled that pistol out on somebody, or I did this. And so it's this inherent tension in recognizing that like somehow you didn't live up to what you wanted to be, independent of what the society is. And so it was like no choice. Like, what choice did I have? All of a sudden, I was stripped of all choices and I had to figure out how to be myself. And some of that was just figuring out how to be myself. That was a sort of conjuring exercise. And so I was in some ways just fortunate that you know, I had so little privilege that I had to improvise constantly. And I had this desire to not to like be anything, but to be something. You know what I mean? Like to become somebody, and not even like somebody in a way I might be in the world today, but like somebody that my mom would be proud of or whatever. So, you know, you running this like gauntlet, and you figuring it out at each obstacle. But I was just committed to running the gauntlet, and I don't think that's necessarily a good answer. But I do think once you name something, so I named myself I'm gonna be a writer, then that gave me some focus for the gauntlet, you know. And that became the thing that was always a guiding point. I want to finish college. And so when I get rejected one time, I go somewhere else because I had named this thing. And I just used the time in between to figure out what the thing would look like on the back end. But I couldn't predict any of this, even like doing the solo shows. When I heard you and Nate, when they were talking about the play that I haven't seen or read, I was like, oh shit, they wrote a play. Man, one day I want to write a play too. You know, it's just like, or like you writing for comics, and that's just like, I think a lot of people who do things I really admire, they've been fortunate enough to find a way not to be in the box. Even when they born with like privilege and opportunity, they've still found a way not to be in a box.
I really, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that shout out. The play is very good. I can't lie. It's mostly good, not just because me and Nate, it's good because of the ensemble of people who make it good. But I was really inspired and moved by the way you use Zoom as a medium. I mean, I'm just blown away by that because you took something that, you know, speaking of like productive constraint, you took something that for most people, especially poets, is annoying, you know, and you really turned it into something else. And I guess I was wondering, like, because I know you've been touring virtually with this for a minute over the last year. And so how has that process been of kind of evolving this into like a multimedia presentation?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just like it is just like being a improviser in a moment. You know, I the bookshelf was built by this cat that was like 85 years old, and it was one of the reasons why we wanted to get the spot because I was like, yo, that shit, that's a bookshelf right there. You know what I mean? I was like, I could see myself writing in this space. And so I'm doing it. I'm like, man, let me just show you what I'm talking about. And then it's all of these elements that just creep in that way. And also, like one of the things about prison is it's just like a lot of paraphernalia of incarceration. And I should say it this way. So pandemic started in February. It was February 7th when I went down to Virginia to argue for the release of my two homies. So all of this has been on the fly. So the stuff that I read you, literally, my homeboy died in December, you know, and so the stuff is like has like been ongoing happening. I just had the Kyoko make the stuff in Japan, and it was all, you know, just figuring out how to take the life and put the life into the work. I had put the prints on my wall because the wall was bare, and I was like, oh, this feels like a set, you know. And I put the paper, and it just was like, I wish I could argue. I had one piece and somebody was criticizing me, right? They was like, yeah, you know, if this was just more visual. And I was like, I fucking hate you, fucking criticizing me. And then I was like, oh, but what if I broke? Oh, you know what? This woman was like, I don't understand blood history. And I was like, what you mean you don't understand blood history? That's a dope ass poem. And then you know, you figure out how to take feedback and say, well, how do you strengthen it? How do you think about making the medium say more because you asking people to hold on to so much? And I was like, oh, what if I broke this up with this story? Oh shit! And what we used to do with toilet papers was so cool. I know that if somebody sees this, it's gonna fuck their head up because this is straight MacGyver type shit, right? So basically, I was doing this for folks, for friends, for people I trusted, and then they give me feedback, and I'd be like, oh, okay, I hear what you're saying. So how do I incorporate other things into it, more visuals? But how do I do it in a way that it ended up being a show about paper? And it ended up being me trying to figure out the different ways, the paraphernalia that paper is explains something about your life. I mean, I really did sign this confession like I was autographing a book. And and I didn't I wrote that in a poem. I actually improvised that into this poem years ago. I was reading a poem and then I just improvised. I signed the confession as if I was autographing a book. And somebody was like, "Oh," and then and then I was like, wait a minute. And I changed it because it sounded dope. And then the other day, like 2 months ago, I'm going through my paperwork and I literally, and what's crazy though, is I see the confession, but check this out. I wrote a letter of apology basically to my two sets of victims. So this is one, right? And look at the signature. And then this is the other one. And it's like I wrote one and I was like, nah, man, that signature ain't hitting. Let me revise the signature. And what's crazy though, I go back and look at it. What's crazy to me is that the letter sounds ignorant as hell. Like it's like, dear owner of the white Subaru. Man, it wasn't a real gun, so you shouldn't have been that scared. Like it's like, what the fuck is you talking about, you know? And what's crazy though is as you read the letter sounds like ignorant kid who did something that he can't grapple with. But the signature says, "Fuck you, I'm gonna be somebody." And what's wild is I signed it R. Dwayne Betts. I never in my fucking life signed my name like that before.
You were inventing a new person through the act of doing that.
And that my first book is published R. Dwayne Betts. I didn't know, like I just discovered this letter shit like a couple months ago.
Mhm.
So 10 years ago, my first book comes out, and because nobody calls me Reginald, they was like, well, you got to publish it R. Dwayne Betts so you don't confuse people. And so I just find it just wild that you know
But
that I ended up
you did that before you even recalled it. I mean, that's bananas.
and legit be signing my name R. Dwayne Betts now.
Right.
So
You
anyway.
know, there's so much in what you just said that is instructive to me, and it actually relates to what you said to the first answer, because what I'm hearing from you is a commitment to iteration, and also to a thing that I have beef about with some people in the literary community is like, or any artist, I think you can't just be mad at audiences not understanding something if you are not also committing to, like, what is the work you're doing to expand the vocabulary of your audience? And I don't just mean the literal vocabulary, right? But like the tools, what tools are you offering people to help them access your work? And I just hear that in everything you're saying. And we talk about like your moms and all of that. So I just appreciate that. Okay, I have so many questions for you. We don't have that much time. All right. You have mentioned also that you've been thinking and reflecting on harm and repair. And right now our country is thinking about re-examining our relationship with harm and repair. And we know that that is a constantly evolving process. So where are you right now, Thursday, April 29th, and you're thinking about how we should think about harm and addressing the ways that we've hurt other people?
Yeah, honestly, I think my approach is rooted in the legal work that I do. You know, I represent people who got bodies. You know, our friend Juvie killed somebody, so Fats was innocent, but I want the dude that who did the killing to also be free. And most of the guys I know were guilty, and so when we work on these parole packets and we're trying to make this plea for freedom, one of the things we end up having to do is think seriously about the harm that we cause folks. And it's not just I mean, people live with it. And when we work on how to articulate it, I think we confront what that meant. And then sometimes we confront what does it mean to repair that. And there's no language for it besides how do I be a better person in the world? Like sometimes you admit that there is no repairing it. I killed somebody, they're not coming back. You know, and I think some loss is permanent, and the fact that loss is permanent doesn't mean that we should inflict another permanent loss on folks. It's hard though, because I find that like everybody wants folks to be free, and well, I find that a lot of times we want folks to be free until we've been harmed, and it's just a constant struggle because I make really compelling cases for the people I represent who are largely friends of mine. Um, but we also exist in a system that doesn't give a lot of folks the opportunity to make compelling cases for themselves. you know, not just because they don't have access to lawyers, but because prisons are vicious and dangerous and violent. And like you got cats who never expected to be able to make parole. And so they never had no push for education, or they always sent them prisons that didn't have programs. And now that they bring parole back, they're saying, well, wait, look at who you've been over the last 10 years. When you strip them of any opportunity to feel intimacy, you've stripped them of any opportunity to be intimate with folks, you've stripped them of any opportunity to imagine being safe without violence, and then you're mad at them because they're not ready for whatever you think is the freedom that they should be warranted, right? So honestly, I think it's really complicated for me. And I look at it through the lens of representing my friends, and I look at it through the lens of admitting that frequently neither I nor they had a language to express to these black folks who have been their victims why they should be free. You know, it's the black folks who've been their victims who also haven't been given access to a vocabulary that says, this is how I heal. You know, we've given them access to a vocabulary that says this is how you make
Of
somebody else suffer.
punishment. Yeah, of
Yeah.
punishment.
So
Hmm.
it's
And
hard though.
vengeance. I really thank you for that. And I want to uplift something. I want to uplift two things out of what you said, just to highlight them so everybody hears them. One is, how do we end our obsession with the notion of innocence, right? And just like the mythology that there's all these innocent people and we have to stop them from doing time undeservingly, right? And instead think about, what if we say that nobody should go to prison, right? And not just obsess over the innocent people. The other thing I want to highlight is this question about parole. And you probably know this, but for those who are listening who might not be aware, Illinois is one of 16 states that actually does not have any means for incarcerated people to even go up for parole. But part of what you're saying is more essential, which is, how are we preparing people to dream for a life beyond, right? Aside from just going up and having an opportunity or not. So I appreciate that. I'm going to ask a couple of questions that folks have submitted in the chat, and then we'll see how we're doing on time and if I can come back to some of my 20,000 questions or not. Could you talk about the incredible cover of Felon, and just your process of the cover, the art? I just would love to hear about the cover.
Yeah, so this is the cover, and the artwork comes from my man Titus Kafar. It's from one of his early pieces, one of his early works. It's called the Jerome Project, and essentially he was, looking up his pops and looking for mugshots or whatever, and he found a lot of black men with the same name who had been incarcerated, and so
Mhm.
he took it and he started doing portraits. And one of the things that he was doing was like reimagining the mugshot, right? So they could be a thing of beauty. I'm thinking about like classical portraiture and who they choose to paint. He is like really conscious and conscientious about who he chooses to paint. And then he took the images and redacted them with and dipped them in tar. And it's talking about what society does to efface us. But also like what I wanted to do was use it as a cover. Is you had these four images, and I wanted to say something that's around how the word felon reduces what you see to just the forehead of a person. And you begin imagining what's behind it, and what you imagine is just some brutality or somebody that's not worth loving. And I wanted you to have to open a book to really think about what's behind what's behind that tar. And so that's why I chose it as a cover. And it's cool when you got friends that produce really dope art, because they make your work better. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, it's such a, I think of the book as a physical object, right? Like the book is an art object, and it's an art object that is the fruit of a collaboration between at least these two artists. So it's just a really powerful cover. Another question we have from the audience is, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful and bold, passionate art with us. I'm a current PhD student with a deep love for art and poetry. There are times when I think the academy has stripped or limited my creativity. Where do you go, or what do you do? How do you tap into your creativity, and where do you turn for inspiration?
I don't know. I mean, like, the academy can't strip you of shit. They ain't the police. The police could barely strip you of shit. You know what I mean? They could kill you though. Hey, I was listening to Richard Pryor, right? Me and my son listened to Richard Pryor, and I was like, man, let me show you this joint. It's niggas versus the police. It's 1974, and he talking about police killing people. And I'm like, yo, this is Pryor in 74. He could be having this conversation today. Listen to what he just said. Pryor was like, shit, white folks get pulled over by the police, and they're like, hey, Mr. Jenkins, how's it going? Oh, I was speeding. Oh, let me take care of that ticket. How are your kids doing? You going bowling this week? And he's like, niggas get pulled over by the police, be like, officer, I'm reaching in my pocket to get my driver's license. I don't want to be no accident. We ain't gonna have no accidents. This 50 years ago, you know what I mean? And it strikes me, right? Because we ask a question like, you know, how does the academy cripple our creativity? How the fuck does Richard Pryor think about this 50 years ago? You know what I mean? So I think that Richard Pryor thought about it 50 years ago because it was happening. And he was willing to notice that it was happening and make it a part of his work. It ain't like it's never these institutions that make us not bold or not brave. I mean, maybe they set a platform and create a climate that encourages us to be passive, that encourages us to not be innovative, but they don't bring us into a room because I've been looking for that room. It's no room that says tenure and they give you a list of fuck shit to do to get tenure. It literally ain't, right? And so, like, one of the things we got to do is imagine what does it mean to be radically ourselves and to radically notice what we want to notice in the world? And then what does it mean to cultivate the audience that cares about that? And I do think one of the things you learn from like MCs, musicians, comedians, is they go out there to the people. You know, they got to go out there and they got to work they shit out in the public.
Or get
And
heckled. And if it's bad, you're gonna get heckled.
right,
Right.
right. But what you doing? And you know, you publish one article a year and nobody reads it. And what I mean is like you could publish an article and always publish the public facing piece that's doing that same work. Or you could talk about your work to others. And when people say, I don't get that, you can say, you know what? Maybe I could make you get this, you know, and maybe I could do something else. And academics, you know, I wish I would go talk to my mom about some legal shit I'm writing. I ain't trying to get heckled. So, you know what I mean? So that's one of the things we're afraid of. It's like, how do we make the academic arguments that we putting out there make it less likely that our folks to heckle us? I'm gonna send my mom one of these. I'm gonna be like, Mom, people be talking to me about Jones v. Mississippi, right? I'm gonna be like, Mom, let me tell you about Jones v. Mississippi, and see if I could talk to her about the doctrine
Right.
that case covers in a way that she'll hear and care about. I mean, I think if we do that a little bit more, it'll push out creativity.
My thing is always, if you don't do that, and to me at least, until you try to do that, you don't really understand it yourself, right? Like,
That's true.
in my opinion, you don't, in my opinion, if you are not at a place where you cannot articulate to your mom, to, you know, I used to teach middle school, right? So middle school is like a 12-year-old can walk up to you at any time and ask you any question about anything, right? And you think you know until you have to explain to a kid on the fly, unprepared, right? And I think that what you're saying is so real. And there's also just like a deep, I think that there is a culture of fear. And I think that for me, I said this earlier today to somebody else, I feel like there's a lot of ambivalence where a lot of people in academia are like, oh, it's so great and things are changing and the work is so good. And, you know, they see multidisciplinary work and boundary pushing work and they're like, yeah, they like it. But then they're not actually encouraging their students to do it or mentoring people to do it. It's like
Right.
they're scared of it.
No, I wrote my New York Times piece. I remember I was in a PhD program at Yale. It's like my wife is like, she was like, you know, the first time you told me that you were finished with education was when you got your MFA. Then you said the same thing when you decided to go to law school. Why are you getting a PhD?
At least stop lying about it. At least stop saying you're finished.
Right. But I remember I was working on this joint. It was a piece for the New York Times Magazine, and it was you know, the story about me basically going from jail to Yale or whatever, right? But it was about a whole lot more. But I remember some of my professors was like, "Yeah, why is you spending your time writing that?" And it was crazy because in sociology though, my professor was like, "Yo, this shit is dope."
Right.
And let me give you some notes on this. And it's also you just got to find your space. At the law school at that moment, they was like, we ain't hearing that. But even when I sent my book proposal that like weaves ethnography and asking these questions about prison and freedom, I sent it to my mentor in the sociology department, and she was like, "Yo, this is fire, and you need to write this even if you can't get your PhD with this. This needs to be out there in the world." And so I also think it's something to be said for how do we find our people,
Yeah,
because
that's so real.
they exist, you know.
That's so real. The other thing that they don't tell you about the professors who told you like, don't do this, this is a waste of time, is they're also a lie, because they'll tell you that up front, but then after it comes out, they'll be circulating, like people, I had a professor tell me, I was writing a piece for the New Yorker, I was in my program, and I was like, it doesn't count, it's academic writing. He was like, Eve, it's the New Yorker, everybody's gonna read it, right? And
Right.
that's the thing, is they read it too, and they like to front, but they won't tell you that till after the fact. Okay, let's see. We have a couple more questions here. Okay, this is a good one because I don't know the answer to this. If you are this person says a creative, which I think all humans are creative, so I assume that they mean like a writer or an artist who has an interest in the law, where would you recommend that they begin their study?
Oh, that's interesting. You should read Paul Beatty's The Sellout. And
Read a novel. Start with a
yeah.
novel.
And then it's this great books though. They called like Fair Court Stories in administrative law. These joints are funky. I got one right here. But what's funky about them is like they got a whole series of a bunch of different ones. So they got administrative law stories, education law stories, and it's essays, but they sort of written to be more public facing than usual. And they tell the stories about how some doctrine got developed. And some of the stories are like really, really interesting, So I would say you could start there. That if I just wanted to like learn about the law, because it's one of those things it's stories, and so it tells you that it's going to approach it in a different way. But I would say also I would really take seriously, like, read A Lesson Before Dying, read Native Son. Think about the ways in which the law interacts with our popular narratives, and then I would say think about like the Scottsboro Boys. It's another book. I can't think of the name of it right now, but it's about Thurgood Marshall, and it's set in Florida, and these cases that he took in Florida, which is some wild shit. Because Thurgood Marshall, on occasion, would tell people who he knew were innocent, "Yo, go ahead, take the plea to life, so that you don't get killed." Can you imagine that?
What?
Yeah,
Thurgood Marshall?
yeah. Can you imagine that? That's some like he trying to save your life though.
Yeah.
Imagine living in a world in which what you do to save somebody's life is to condemn them to prison. So So yes, I would say I would do that. I would look at the way in which poetry too, and then I would just get a book like Fair Court Stories, because I wish I would have read this before law school. It would have made me think really differently about whether or not I wanted to go to law school. And
Can you say the title one more time and put it in the chat? It's called Federal Court Stories.
yeah, it's called Federal Court Stories by Foundation Press.
That sounds dope. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to say farewell. So I watched another interview with you where a person asked you a question that I get asked, a question that all Black writers get asked, which is, are you hopeful? What gives you hope?
Probably start laughing.
My question for you is, why do you think people like to ask all Black writers if we are hopeful or if we have hope? That's my question.
Yeah, it's strange though. It's like we the canary in the coal mine. But also I think because they don't want to ask themselves that shit, because they might answer in a way that's radically fucked up. They'd be like, because I ain't really.
Well,
I mean, if I was you, like I have hope, but honestly, my cousin's still racist. So is my aunt and my uncle, and I don't know if you should have too much hope. I mean, redlining, shit. So I think one is like we the canary in the coal mine, but the other one is that. And also, I think other people don't want to ask themselves questions that put pressure on them. It's like put pressure on yourself sometimes. One of the wildest things is folks say, "Yo, Dwayne, it's been a rough week. I hope you doing all right." Nigga, I hope you doing all right. You know what I mean? Like, what you mean?
Just texting you, just checking in.
Right. I'm like, yo, I was Black, and when Rodney King got fucked up, I was still Black. 1974, my peoples was alive when Richard Pryor was talking that shit. So like, this is like 50 years of this shit. This is not like new to my grandmama. So it's like, I can't text my grandmama and say, "Hey, did you hear what happened? Are you all right?" She gonna be like, "What?
Right.
Do you remember DC in the 80s?" So I think one of the things is just people want us to give them permission sometimes.
Yes.
To be inactive, or they want to give us permission for their newfound discovery of suffering.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Ooh,
And so
you already said another better word. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I got to ask you that question. It's such a ubiquitous question. It's always like the last question. Somebody comes up to the mic and they're like, what about hope? I'm like, I can't help you. On that uplifting note, I want to thank you so much for joining us and for your work, which is so inspirational, not only in the content, but for me also in the form, just as a poet and as a person in the world. Thank you for everything that you do. I'm so grateful for you and for this conversation. And I'm going to turn it back over to my dear colleague, Professor Snorton, to close us out.
Thank you. It's a true pleasure.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much, both to Eve and to Dwayne for that incredible performance and conversation. Also, if you want to hear more from Reginald Dwayne Betts, it's not too late to register for his poetry workshop, Juxtaposing the Public and the Private, which takes place tomorrow, April 30th, from 12 to 1:30 Central Standard Time, PM. Thanks to everyone for joining us for this year's CSRPC Annual Public Lecture and the closing plenary of the Centering Race Consortium's conference, Racial Reckonings and the Future of the Humanities. To learn more about the centers in the consortium, please join our listservs, which you should be able to find in the chat, and follow us on social media. Many thanks also to our co-sponsors for this afternoon's event, the Posen Family Center Human Rights Lab, and the Mass Incarceration Working Group at UChicago. May we continue to reckon and transform. Take care, everyone.